for us to take.
Yeah, and just a bit of historical context. I recall back when the OCP was being formulated 10 years ago, because there was a lot of discussion at Trust Council about density transfers and amenity zoning. And these were basically the new tools that had just come out, and nobody had ever really used them before. And I remember that in Salt Spring, it was considered quite revolutionary to actually put policies in there. A lot of islands backed off from that and didn't. But Salt Spring actually had some of the more sort of bold policies that had never been tried. And so I think 10 years have gone by, and probably they are some of the policies that you should probably review. But, you know, it was a really big item of discussion back then. So it's interesting that it's still in. So did you want to make it as a motion?
If you'd like, I would move to direct staff to provide us information about, how should I put it, many more details about density transfer policy.
Okay. So moved and seconded, and you'll make sure that's in writing? Okay.
Yep.
Any more discussion? All those in favor? Okay, motion carries.
Item 6.7.3 deals with setbacks. And I would move that we remove from further consideration the recommendation to increase the shoreline setback to 30 meters and retain for further discussion the recommendation to increase the existing vertical setback from 1.5 to 2 meters.
So could you repeat the number? It was 6.7.3.
Item 1.
Item 1. So that's removed from consideration of 30 meter
30 meter.
and retained for consideration the vertical.
Yes. The recommendation was to go to 2 meters from the current 1.5 meters. Again, I understand this is an LUP thing.
And it's a land use bylaw thing. So it's an idea, and we're just talking about principles about what that's all about. So again, it's not a numbers thing that will end up in the OCP. It's verbatim.
So
Okay.
if I have a second, or I'll speak to it.
Okay, so moved and seconded. Did you want to speak to it?
Just, I won't belabor this. I think a great many people have raised the concern that that rightly comes from a horizontal setback of that nature when we have so many existing buildings within that boundary, and also the fact that, at least given the topography of this island, that the 30-meter setback doesn't really address the critical issue, which is your height above the water, not your distance back from the water. If we were on much more low-bank property, if we had sandy beaches where houses were subject to much more storm damage, waves and things like that, then I would be more sympathetic to the idea of a greater horizontal setback. That's not our topography. It does create a great deal of hardship, problems, insurance issues, all sorts of stuff. I understand the motivation behind this to try to address a problem that we ought to be aware of in the future, but I think it really doesn't address the problem. It creates too many difficulties. But as we have heard again many times, a lot of people said to us, it's the vertical height that really matters. And I think we should think about, at least think about it, again, it was not something that would go in the OCP, but what is an appropriate vertical elevation given sea level rise and greater storm intensity and frequency. So I think we should talk about that, but I'm prepared not to waste any more time talking about the 30-meter setback.
Trustee Lamb, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I've just had I think the motivation for the recommendation came from this group, and I think the person who had done the research on it was brave enough to stand up at the meeting in the Lions Hall and at least provide some justification. He was referring to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that did a report on climate change and coastal resiliency, and talked about the increased vulnerability from sea level rises and increased frequency of storm surges. He also looked at some other jurisdictions and did establish that others are going to 30 meters, even higher than that, but they tend to be, as George mentioned, they tend to be those areas that have very erodible shorelines, sandy beaches and such, or as Machosa calls them, drift sector beaches, which are certainly vulnerable to this kind of weather, change in weather patterns. agree. The vertical is the critical measure. On most of the submissions we got that were objecting to the 30 meters did acknowledge that the vertical setback, if you like, was important. The 1.5 meters, I think, comes from the provincial guidelines, as does the 15 meters we have. And I don't know if the province will be making a change to that 1.5 meters as part of their assessment of global warming. But I certainly support the idea that we not pursue the 30-meter setback, but that we do perhaps to take another look at the vertical setback. I'd add one other thing, and that is that we have in process now, hoping it fairly soon, some new contour mapping of the island. The current mapping we have, I think, is 20-meter intervals, which really isn't very helpful at all with this kind of work. And we have got, I think, a 2-meter interval with some spot 1-meter contours and mapping for the whole island, which I hope is going to be completed sometime this year. And that will be helpful in looking at this issue.
And I think it's sort of a bigger issue for local governments generally right now. We just saw how local governments a lot of them signed on to this climate action charter, and I think we can assume that both at a federal, provincial level, government agencies are going to be looking at the implications of climate change. And I know it was mentioned earlier about issues such as liability, exposure, and insurability. Well, from a local government perspective, the liability issues where we need to consider public safety concerns and where we see a threat and don't take action to amend our regulations, either to be consistent with other, we could actually create exposures. And I think about the North Van incident, where now, because of unusual rain and whatnot, some houses went down in a embankment, somebody was killed, and now the local government that approved the development of those houses on that unstable slope, has been taken to court. So, as these things happen, and if we don't want people building, so that they're going to, first of all, the insurers might not insure them if there's a threat that they may get hit by a big wave or, all of that. So we need to look at it from the public safety and our fiduciary duty in that respect. And I think that our legal review of some of these issues and also watching what's happening with other local governments to make sure that we're aware of what's there and again basing things more on science and what our legal counsel tell us. So again, this would not end up in the OCP, it would be a land use bylaw thing, but again, it's a bigger issue than just that. So, are you ready to vote?